As the adrenaline of the final battle faded, the crew of the Dawnbreaker found themselves confronted with the harsh reality of their losses. The ship was a battered shell of its former self, its hull scorched and scarred by the relentless onslaught of enemy fire. And the cost in lives had been high, with several of their comrades fallen in the desperate struggle against the Malaxian fleet. Arra moved through the ship's corridors like a ghost, her heart heavy with the weight of the sacrifices that had been made. She had led her team into the jaws of hell, had asked them to give everything they had in the name of their mission. And now, as she looked upon the aftermath of that terrible battle, she couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt and sorrow wash over her. In the medical bay, Ayla worked tirelessly to tend to the wounded, her face a mask of grim determination as she fought to save the lives of her battered comrades. Jax and TV lay on adjacent beds, their bodies broken and bruised but their spirits unbroken. They had given everything they had in the battle against the Malaxians, had fought with a courage and tenacity that defied belief. And then there were the fallen, the brave souls who had made the ultimate sacrifice in the name of their cause. Rafe, the infiltration specialist who had been with Arra since the beginning, had fallen in the final assault on the Malaxian command ship, his body consumed by the fiery explosion that had torn the mighty behemoth apart. Kell, the unflappable sniper who had saved their lives countless times with his uncanny accuracy and unwavering resolve, had been cut down by a hail of enemy fire as he fought to cover their retreat. Their losses were a bitter blow, a reminder of the terrible cost of their victory. But even as she mourned their passing, Arra knew that their sacrifices had not been in vain. They had given their lives so that others might live, had laid down their own futures so that the people of Agranus Septim might have a chance at freedom. As she made her way to the ship's command center, Arra found Marcus waiting for her, his grizzled face etched with the same sorrow and grief that she felt in her own heart. The old soldier had seen more than his share of loss and sacrifice in his long years of service, but the pain of losing their comrades still cut deep. "I'm sorry, Arra," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know how much they meant to you, to all of us." Arra nodded, her throat tight with grief. "They were more than just soldiers," she said softly. "They were family." Marcus placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, his eyes shining with a fierce, unwavering pride. "And they died as they lived," he said firmly. "As heroes fighting for something greater than themselves." Arra felt a surge of gratitude and affection for the old soldier, for the unwavering support and loyalty he had shown her throughout their long and arduous mission. He had been a rock in the storm, a steadfast presence that had kept them grounded and focused even in the darkest of times. And as she looked around at the battered but unbroken faces of her remaining crew, Arra knew that their bond was stronger than ever. They had been forged in the crucible of battle, had been tested and tempered by the fires of adversity. And though they had lost some of their own along the way, they had emerged stronger and more united than ever before. They were the unbreakable few, the last line of defense against the darkness that threatened to engulf the galaxy. And though the road ahead was long and fraught with peril, Arra knew that they would face it together, bound by the unbreakable bonds of camaraderie and sacrifice. For they were more than just soldiers, more than just a crew. They were a family, forged in the fires of war, and tempered by the unbreakable bonds of love and loyalty. And as long as they had each other, as long as they held fast to the memory of those they had lost, Arra knew that there was no force in the galaxy that could stand against them. The losses had been great, the sacrifices beyond measure. But in the end, it was those very sacrifices that had given them the strength to carry on, to fight another day in the name of those who had fallen. And as the Dawnbreaker limped its way back towards the safety of Orion space, Arra knew that their mission was far from over. But with the memory of their fallen comrades to guide them, and the unbreakable bonds of their fellowship to sustain them, she knew that they would never stop fighting for the cause of freedom and justice in the galaxy. The journey back to Centrium was a somber affair, the weight of their losses hanging heavy over the battered crew of the Dawnbreaker. The once vibrant corridors of the ship were now eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the hum of the engines and the occasional murmur of conversation. Arra moved through the ship like a ghost, her heart heavy with grief and exhaustion. She had pushed herself to the very limits of her endurance, had given everything she had to see their mission through to its bitter end. And now, as the adrenaline faded and the reality of their situation sank in, she felt a bone-deep weariness settle over her, like a shroud. But even in the midst of her sorrow and fatigue, Arra knew that she could not afford to rest, not yet. The Dawnbreaker was a battered shell of its former self, its systems strained to the breaking point by the relentless battles and narrow escapes of their harrowing journey. And with Zara working around the clock to keep the ship together, Arra knew that she had to be there to support her friend and crewmate in any way she could. As she made her way to the engine room, Arra found Zara hunched over a console, her face drawn and pale with exhaustion. The young tech specialist had been working tirelessly to keep the Dawnbreaker's systems running, had pushed herself to the very brink of collapse in her determination to see them through to safety. "Zara," Arra said softly, placing a gentle hand on her friend's shoulder. "You need to rest. You've been at this for days." Zara shook her head, her eyes never leaving the flickering readouts on the screen before her. "I can't, Arra," she said, her voice tight with strain. "The power couplings are on the verge of overloading, and if I don't keep rerouting the energy flow, we could lose life support." Arra felt a surge of pride and admiration for her friend's dedication, even as her heart ached at the toll it was taking on her. Zara had always been the heart of the Dawnbreaker, the brilliant mind that kept their ship and their mission running smoothly. And now, in their darkest hour, she was pushing herself beyond all limits to keep them alive. "Let me help," Arra said, moving to stand beside her friend at the console. "Tell me what to do." For the next few hours, they worked side by side, their fingers flying across the controls as they fought to keep the Dawnbreaker's system stable. It was a grueling task, a battle against time and the unforgiving realities of space travel. But with each passing moment, Arra felt a sense of purpose and camaraderie wash over her, a reminder of the unbreakable bonds that held their crew together. And as the long hours of their journey stretched on, Arra found herself thinking back on all they had endured, all they had sacrificed in the name of their mission. She thought of Rafe and Kell, the brave souls who had given their lives so that others might live. She thought of Jax and TV, the wounded warriors who had fought with a courage and tenacity that defied belief. And she thought of Marcus, the grizzled old soldier who had been her rock and her mentor throughout their long and arduous journey. He had seen more than his share of loss and sacrifice in his long years of service, but through it all, he had remained a steadfast presence, a reminder of the unbreakable spirit that drove them all. As the Dawnbreaker finally emerged from hyperspace, the glittering spires of Centrium rising up to greet them like a beacon of hope, Arra felt a sense of relief and gratitude wash over her. They had made it, had survived the impossible odds and the terrible sacrifices of their mission. But even as she stepped out onto the landing platform, her eyes stinging with the brightness of the artificial sunlight, Arra knew that their journey was far from over. The losses they had suffered, the scars they bore both physical and emotional, would stay with them forever, a reminder of the terrible cost of their victory. But they would carry on, would continue to fight for the cause of justice and freedom in the galaxy. For they were the unbreakable few, the last line of defense against the darkness that threatened to engulf them all. And as long as they had each other, as long as they held fast to the memory of those they had lost, Arra knew that there was no force in the universe that could stand against them. The journey home had been a long and painful one, a crucible of sorrow and sacrifice. But it had also been a testament to the unbreakable bonds of their fellowship, to the strength and resilience of the human spirit in the face of impossible odds. And as Arra looked out over the glittering cityscape of Centrium, she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, united by the unbreakable ties of camaraderie and sacrifice. As the battered Dawnbreaker touched down on the landing platform of Centrium's sprawling spaceport, Arra felt a rush of emotions wash over her. Relief at having finally made it back to the safety of Orion's capital. Grief for the friends and comrades they had lost along the way. And a sense of trepidation, knowing that their arrival would be met with a maelstrom of questions, debriefings, and the inevitable politics of a mission gone awry. But as the ship's ramp lowered and the crew stepped out into the bright artificial sunlight, they were met with a sight that none of them could have anticipated. A sea of faces stretched out before them. A crowd of Orion citizens and military personnel alike, their expressions a mix of awe, gratitude, and unbridled joy. For a moment, Arra was stunned, unable to comprehend the magnitude of the reception that awaited them. But as the cheers and applause washed over her like a wave, she felt a sense of pride and humility well up within her, a realization of the impact their actions had had on the people of Orion. They were heroes, the crowd seemed to say. The brave few who had ventured into the heart of enemy territory, who had struck a blow against the Malaxian war machine, and brought their captured comrades home. The ones who had sacrificed so much, who had laid down their lives and their futures for the cause of freedom and justice in the galaxy. As Arra made her way through the throng of well-wishers and admirers, she felt a hand clasp her shoulder, firm and reassuring. She turned to see Marcus standing beside her, his grizzled face split in a rare smile. "You did good, kid," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Your old man would be proud." Arra felt a lump form in her throat at the mention of her father, the legendary Orion commander who had inspired her to follow in his footsteps. He had been a hero to their people, a shining example of the courage and sacrifice that defined the Orion way of life. And now, as she looked out over the sea of faces before her, Arra realized that she and her crew had taken up that mantle, had become the new heroes of their generation. It was a heavy burden to bear, a responsibility that weighed upon her shoulders like a physical weight. But as she looked around at her fellow survivors, at Zara and Marcus, at Jax and Teve and all the others who had fought and bled and sacrificed alongside her, Arra knew that she would not have to bear that burden alone. They were a team, a family forged in the crucible of war and tempered by the unbreakable bonds of camaraderie. And together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, would continue to fight for the cause of justice and freedom in the galaxy. As the celebrations continued around them, Arra found herself pulled into a whirlwind of ceremonies and speeches, of medals and accolades bestowed upon her and her crew. It was a surreal experience, a blur of pomp and circumstance that left her feeling drained and overwhelmed. But through it all, she held fast to the memory of those they had lost, to the sacrifices that had brought them to this moment. Rafe and Kell, the fallen heroes whose courage and selflessness had saved countless lives. The brave resistance fighters of Agrunna Septim, who had laid down their lives to buy the Dawnbreaker the time it needed to escape. And in the quiet moments between the celebrations and the debriefings, Arra found herself thinking of the future, of the challenges that lay ahead. The Malaxians were still out there, still a threat to the peace and stability of the galaxy. And the Orion Alliance, for all its strength and unity, was not invulnerable to the forces of greed and ambition that lurked in the shadows. But as she looked out over the glittering cityscape of Centrium, at the throngs of people who had come to welcome them home as heroes, Arra felt a sense of hope and determination well up within her. They had faced impossible odds before, had overcome challenges that would have broken lesser crews. And with the strength of their bond, with the unbreakable ties of fellowship that held them together, Arra knew that they would continue to fight, to strive for a better future for all the peoples of the galaxy. For they were the unbreakable few, the heroes of Orion, and their story was far from over. I hope you enjoyed the story so far. It's just part of a much longer and grander story. Please be sure to subscribe and drop a like too. The next part of the story will be in the top left once it's out.